This documentary is about the 1967 referendum. This referendum was laid forward to help the Aboriginal people to be included in the Australian census and the new nation and bring the effects of the Aboriginal Australians to the Commonwealth.
In the 1901 Constitution, there were only two references that were related to the Aboriginal people. Both of these references were aimed at excluding the Aboriginal people from partaking in the life of the new nation. In section 127 of the Constitution, it said that, in reckoning of the number of people in the Commonwealth, Aboriginal natives shall not be counted. And in section 51 of the Constitution, gave the federal government the power to pass laws regarding the Aboriginal people in any state. As a result of the Constitution, Aboriginal Australians were subject to different laws depending on where they lived. This meant that different states' laws and regulations saw Aboriginals with rights in one state that were denied in others.
Before 1967 referendum and after Federation, there were many protests about how Indigenous Australians were not counted in the Australian census, and that the welfare of Indigenous Australians was the concern of the state government and not the federal government. The most famous of these protests were the Freedom Rides. These were inspired by the freedom rides of American civil rights movement. Students from the University of Sydney formed a group called the Student Action for Aboriginals, led by Charles Perkins among others, and travelled into New South Wales country towns on what some of them considered a fact-finding mission. What they encountered was segregation. The students protested, picketed, and faced violence, raising the issues of Indigenous rights. They commonly stood protesting for hours at segregated areas such as pools, parks, and pubs, which raised a mixed reception in the country towns.
The Holt government agreed to hold a referendum to change the Constitution. All political parties at the time agreed to the inclusion of Aboriginal people in the new nation and giving the Commonwealth the power to put into practice policies and pass laws regarding Aboriginal issues. They made advertisements in the media and sent books to homes outlining and show the issues and arguments towards the Aboriginal Australians. The referendum meant that the Aboriginal Australians were included in the Australian census and they were able to partake in the life of the new country.
The overwhelming support for the yes vote gave the federal government a clear mandate to implement policies to benefit Aboriginal people. A lot of misconceptions have been arisen as to the outcome of the referendum. Some are a result of it taking on a symbolic meaning during a period of increased Aboriginal self-confidence. It was some 5 years before any real change occurred as a result of the referendum, but federal legislation has since been enacted covering land rights, discriminatory practices, financial assistance, and preservation of cultural heritage. The other aspects of the constitutional change, enabling of Aboriginal people to be counted in the population statistics, has led to a clearer comparison of desperate state of Aboriginal health.
The government and the opposition argued a yes response from the Australians in the referendum. Almost 91% of Australians voted for the Constitution to be changed. Before 1967, the states had exclusive power to make laws for the Aboriginal people, and however after 1967, both the state and the Commonwealth had the power to make these laws. In 1967, the referendum was the most successful referendum in Australian history.
In 1967, the Holt government agreed to hold the referendum. All political parties at the time agreed to the inclusion of Aboriginal people in the census, and giving the Commonwealth the power to implement policy and to pass laws regarding Aboriginal issues. Through the media and advertising, the government and the opposition urged a yes response to the referendum.
The referendum of 1967 allowed Aboriginal people to be counted in the census and as Australian citizens and gave the federal government the power to make laws on behalf of the Aboriginal people.